Hi, fourth graders. It's Mrs. Semick here, and I'm ready to go on with our next reading lesson for today. So, as we investigate here more about the genre of fiction, we are going to take a closer look at traditional literature. Now, readers, we really appreciate myths that are based upon tradition and they reflect the beliefs of the people who tell them. Now, myths will usually include like a moral, like a lesson, and provide guidance to show people how they should act. And these stories have survived for centuries because they pass down the values of a culture, like you guessed it, from generation to generation. Now, these traditional literary stories, they usually include common characteristics, and that leads us to our guiding question today. What are those common characteristics? So let's take a look here, okay? So by identifying the rich literary language, which is the first characteristic here, next we're also going to take a look at the cultural language that is used. And also, we're going to look and analyze the strong characters in our stories. And by doing that, we're going to derive a deeper understanding and more enjoyment for the story. Now, as I dive into my literary language, have you ever noticed that when we read traditional literature stories, they often begin with things like once upon a time, or there once lived a very rich king, or once in a land far, far away? Okay. If you've recognized that, then that's just simply an example of that literary language that traditional literature will use. So that's that first characteristic. Now, going on to our second here. When we encounter cultural language in these stories, we can really look at the story we've already shared together, the Korean Cinderella, okay? And we're first introduced here to a little magical creature, the Takabas, excuse me, okay? And that's kind of usually found in our Korean folklore. Now, our Takabas is our magical creature that Pear Blossom encounters and helps her along the way. Also, if you notice kind of at the end of the Korean Cinderella, the helpful animals that helped her along the way, they all chant that Iwa, which means in Korean, pear blossom. So we can see that cultural language used with the Korean folklore magical creature, the Takabas, and also the use of the word Iwa, okay, used in the Korean Cinderella. And the cultural language featured in these stories, it helps us gain a deeper understanding of our cultural setting in this story and also of the characters. So that was that second characteristic. Okay, the third characteristic of traditional literature is our strong characters. Now, these characters may be described in detail, or we may have to make an inference about them through their thoughts, through their words, and through their actions. Now, these characters may be people, they could be animals, they could be mysterious creatures with or without magical powers. And we are going to take a look at a strong character today in the traditional literary story or myth titled King Midas and the Golden Touch. And the version we're going to read is by Charlotte Craft. Now, as we're going to examine the characteristics of traditional literature, we're going to be really, truly understanding, have a better understanding of this story and really enjoy it. Okay? So that's that last characteristic here. Our characters can be described in detail. We infer them through their thoughts, words, and actions. Remember, our characters can be not just people, but also animals or mysterious creatures. So, friends, before we get into King Midas, our read aloud for today, get out your reading notebook for me. Okay? And what I want you to do in your reading notebook here, I want you to copy down, make 3 columns for me in your notebook. Okay? In the first column, write down literary language. In the second column, write down cultural language. And in the third column, write down strong characters. Okay, at any point, you can pause this video so that you can catch up with the writing. Now, remember, under the column with literary language, you're going to put a little bulleted list here. Once upon a time, and then there once lived a very rich king. And that should go under the title here, literary language. Next, in your second column, we know it's cultural language. You're going to write down Takabas, the magical creatures that helped Pear Blossom, and the helpful animals that chant Iwa, which in Korea means pear blossom. Okay. And for this last column here, we have our strong characters. And we know that this means that our characters can be described in detail, or we may have to make inferences about them through their thoughts, words, and actions. And the other little note about our strong characters is that these characters could be people, animals, or mysterious creatures. So feel free, pause your video, okay? Catch up with me here. And once you have those notes written down in your reading notebook, you can go ahead and hit play, and we're going to take a look at our read aloud for today. Okay. So if you're joining back with me, that means you have copied down the 3 columns of notes here about our 3 separate characteristics. And today, like I said before, we're going to read a traditional literary story or a myth, okay, titled King Midas and the Golden Touch. And as we read, we're going to examine those characteristics within our traditional literature. But don't run away from King Midas, because we're really going to investigate him as a character. Okay, so let me pull up my read aloud for us today. King Midas and the Golden Touch. There once lived a very rich king called Midas, who believed that nothing was more precious than gold. He loved its soft yellow hue and comforting weight in the palm of his hand. The chink of gold coins dropped into a leather purse sounded sweeter to him than the songs of his finest musicians. There was only one thing that King Midas loved more, and that was his daughter, Aurelia. Now, Aurelia, he often told her as she played by the throne, someday I shall bequeath you to the greatest treasury of gold in all the world. Now, friends, on this very first page, I notice an example of rich literature language. In the opening line of the story, like we said before, there once lived a very rich king called Midas. That's that literary language, right? And it sets up for a story that transports us to a different time and place. This language really sets the mood as we begin the story. I also note an example of cultural language. As we go to that second characteristic, the name of the king Midas' daughter is Aurelia. Now, Aurelia, this is a cultural name, and it's a very grand name befitting of a king's daughter. So I wonder what Midas is like as a person. And as we continue reading, let's think about that. Let's remember we need to infer his character through his thoughts, his actions, and his words. All right, so let's keep reading about him. There had been a time, however, when King Midas loved roses as much as he now loved gold. He had once called together the best gardeners in his realm, and the garden they created for him became renowned for the beauty and the variety of his roses. But in time, the delicate fragrances and exquisite colors meant nothing to Midas. Only Aurelia still loved the garden, and every day she would pick a bouquet of the most perfect roses to adorn the king's breakfast table. But when Midas saw the flowers, he would think, their beauty lasts but a day. If they were gold, would it last forever? One day the king's guards found an old man asleep under the rose bushes and brought him before King Midas. Unbind him, King Midas ordered. Without my gold, I would be as poor as he. Tonight he shall dine with me. So that night the old man sat at the king's table, where he was well fed and entertained by the king himself. And after a good night's sleep, the old man went on his way. That morning, as he often did, Midas went down into the dungeon, and with a large brass key, he unlocked the door to the secret chamber where he kept his gold. After carefully locking the door behind him, he sat down to admire his precious wealth. Ah, I do love it so, he sighed, gazing at his riches. No matter how hard I work, no matter how long I live, I will never have enough. I'm starting to understand his character a little bit more now. Here, I've noticed that Midas says that no matter how long he lives, he will never have enough gold. He seems to me to have a lot already. So that's something that he says in his dialogue. We call that dialogue is the speech that a character will say out loud or think here in a story. And this is something he is saying. No matter how hard I work, no matter how long I live, I shall never have enough. Kind of lets me know a little bit more about him. Also, okay, if we're pointing out, we can feel that literary language as we go through, okay? And we're going to see that here even more on the next page. He was lost in these thoughts when the chamber suddenly filled with light. King Midas looked up and was amazed to behold the glowing figure of a young woman. Since there was no way into the room but through the locked door, Midas knew he was in the presence of magic. Do you not recognize me, friend? Midas shook his head. The mysterious stranger smiled at him, and it seemed that all the gold in the dungeon glittered even brighter. I am the old man from the rose garden. Instead of punishing me for trespassing, you entertain me at your table. I had thought to reward you for your kindness, but with so much gold, you must surely want for nothing. That's not true, cried Midas. A man can never have enough gold. The stranger's smile broadened. Well, then, what would make you a happier man? Midas thought for a moment. Perhaps if everything I touch would turn to gold, he said. This is your wish? Yes, for then it would always be at my fingertips, Midas assured him. Think carefully, my friend, cautioned the visitor. Yes, replied Midas, the golden touch would bring me all the happiness I need. And so it shall be yours. Listen to those suddenly filled. Behold the glowing feature. So it shall be yours. Okay, that again is that literary language we can hear being used in this story. So Midas seems so happy now that he's going to get this golden touch. So let's see what he's going to do with it. Remember, he said, let's be careful, my friend, right? With that, the mysterious figure became brighter and brighter until the light became so intense that Midas had to close his eyes. And when he opened them, he was alone once again. Had the enchantment worked? Midas eagerly rubbed the great brass door key, but was greatly disappointed. There was no gold in his hands. Bewildered, he looked around the dim room and wondered if perhaps maybe he had been dreaming. But when King Midas awoke the next day, he found his bedchamber bathed in a golden light, glistening in the morning sun. The plain linen bed covers had been transformed into finely spun gold. Jumping out of bed, he gasped with astonishment. The bedpost turned to gold as soon as he touched it. It's true, he cried. I have the golden touch. Midas pulled on his clothes, and he was thrilled to find himself wearing a handsome suit of gold. Never mind that it was a bit heavy. He slid his spectacles onto his nose. To his delight, they too turned to gold. Never mind that he couldn't see through them. And with a great gift as great as this, he thought no inconvenience could be too great. Without wasting another minute, Midas rushed out of the room, through the palace, and into the garden. Here he goes. Look at everything transforming into gold as he's touching it and going along. Could there really be an inconvenience that would be too great? I wonder. The roses glistened with the morning dew, and their scent greatly perfumed the air. Midas went from bush to bush, touching each of the blossoms. How happy Aurelia will be when she sees these roses of gold, he exclaimed. He never noticed how perfect golden blossoms drooped and pulled down the bushes with their weight. Soon it was time for breakfast, and Midas sat down just as Aurelia entered the room, clutching a golden rose, her face wet with tears. Father, a horrible thing has happened, she said, sobbing. I went to the garden to pick you a flower, but all of these roses have become hard and yellow. They are golden roses now, my love, and will never fade. But I miss their scent, Father, cried Aurelia. I'm sorry, my dear. I thought only to please you. Now we can buy all the roses you would ever wish for. Midas smiled at his daughter to comfort her. Please wipe your eyes. We'll have our breakfast together. Midas lifted a spoonful of porridge to his mouth, but as soon as the porridge touched his lips, it turned into a hard, golden lump. Well, perhaps if I eat quickly, he thought, puzzled, and snatched a fig from a bowl of fruit. It turned to solid gold before he could take a bite. He reached out for some bread, but his fingertips had no sooner brushed against the loaf than it too turned to gold. He tried cheese and even a spoonful of jam, but to no avail. How am I going to eat? He grumbled. What's wrong, Father? Asked Aurelia. Nothing, he answered, wishing not to worry her. Nothing at all, my child. Midas began to wring his hands. If he was hungry now, imagine how much more hungry he would be by dinner. And then he began to wonder, will I ever eat again? So Midas is beginning to realize here that his golden touch may not be so wonderful after all. And he was upset that he upset Aurelia by turning her roses into gold. And now he cannot eat because his food turns to gold too. I wonder what are the other problems he may be facing. Aurelia, who had been anxiously watching her father all this time, slipped out of the chair and went to comfort him. "Please don't cry," she said. And Midas smiled and took her hand into his, but suddenly he recoiled in horror. His daughter stood before him, an expression of concern frozen on her face, and a teardrop clinging to her golden cheek. His cursed touch had turned Aurelia into a lifeless statue. Midas howled in anguish and tore at his hair. He couldn't bear to look at the statue, but neither could he bear to leave her side. Oh my. And here he is, just in complete anguish, realizing what's happened. "Well, King Midas, are you not the happiest of men?" Midas wiped his eyes and saw the mysterious stranger standing before him once again. "Oh no, I am the most miserable of men," he cried. "What? Did I not grant your wish for the golden touch?" "Yes, but it is a curse to me now," Midas wept. "All that I truly loved is now lost to me." "Do you mean to say," asked the young man, "that you would prefer a crust of bread or a cup of water to the gift of the golden touch?" "Oh, yes," Midas exclaimed. "I would give up all the gold in the world if my only daughter were restored to me." "Then make your way to the river that flows past the borders of your kingdom. Follow the river upstream until you reach its source, and as you cleanse yourself in the foaming spring, the golden touch will be washed away. Take with you a vase so that you may sprinkle water over any object you wish to change back to its original form." And with those words, the young man, he vanished. So I see a change in my character here. It seems to me that King Midas has finally realized he truly loves something more than gold, his daughter. And even though he acted like gold is the best thing in the world, it sounds like he thinks his daughter is now better. So here he is going to the source of the river. As soon as Midas reached the spring, he plunged in without removing even his shoes. As the water washed the gold from his clothes, he noticed a pretty little violet glowing wild along the banks and gently brushed his finger against it. And when he saw that the delicate purple flower continued to bend with the breeze, he was overjoyed. Midas made his way back to the palace, where the first thing he did was to sprinkle the water over his beloved Aurelia. No sooner did the water touch her cheek than she was restored. Laughing at her father's game and remembering not a moment of being a golden statue. Together the two went out to the rose garden, and Midas sprinkled each frozen rose with a little river water. And Aurelia clapped her hands when she saw them cured of their golden blight. Joyfully then, Midas restored all else he had transformed, except for one single rose, kept forever as a reminder of the golden touch. All right, friends. So I'm going to return back here. So again, one of my favorite things about the story is the character of King Midas. Okay, so let's kind of talk about him just a little bit here together. How would you go about describing King Midas? Well, he was a mighty king who had a love for gold, right? He loved it more than anything else in the world. We did also know that he did truly love his daughter Aurelia. And he did demonstrate, okay, another characteristic here. It says, how does he act? Well, what was interesting about what he acted is he did invite this trespasser to his castle. So he does show some compassion as a character. But what does he say and do? He says that there's nothing in this world that would make him happier than gold. And he requests to have this golden touch, right? Now, this is important because our characters a lot of times do show this towards the end of the story. Do you think King Midas stayed the same? Or do you think he changed by the end of the story? I would definitely say that he showed a great transformation. He definitely changed by the end of our story. He had a lot of greed, right, in the beginning, where he wanted nothing more than just gold. That's all he thought about. Okay, and even showed that that's the only thing he cared about because he wanted everything to be gold. But then when he lost his one true thing that he loved more than anything else in the world, his daughter, he realized where his heart should be, right? That maybe gold wasn't what was truly important in life. It was about being with your family and those that you love. Okay. He really, I felt like, kind of learned an appreciation maybe for for those little things in life that maybe he had just kind of taken for granted, like food, right? Okay. And the smell of the roses. And that was definitely shown in his actions towards the end of the story. So as we wrap things up today, as readers, we learn to understand and enjoy traditional literature, traditional fictional stories by looking closely at those specific characteristics. The literary language, there once lived a very rich king, right? The cultural language here, we saw through the Korean Cinderella with those Korean folklore terms. We also appreciate our strong characters. King Midas was a very strong character here. And he's going to be the character in your Google Doc that you're going to be filling out for me today. He is the character here that you're going to fill in the middle. Now, based on King Midas, okay, we know he was a very wealthy king. Some facts about him. He was a wealthy king from long ago. He had a daughter named Aurelia, right? And he truly loved gold, right? Okay. What about his thoughts and feelings? We know he loved his daughter. We know he loved gold more than anything else in the world. Think about the dialogue that was used. I thought something important. Remember, the dialogue is what is actually being said in the story. He even talks about here in the story how he wishes that he could, everything to his touch would be turned to gold because that's all he ever truly cared for in life, right? And then his actions. I think the actions really that were important is that, he jumped in that river. He wanted to wash himself away of the golden touch. He carried that water back with him. And what was the first thing he washed the golden touch away from? It was his daughter, because that's who he truly loved. We saw that. There's plenty of other things, you friends, that I want to see that you could pull out of our story. What were some facts you learned about King Midas? What were his thoughts and feelings, things that he said in the story and actions he did in the story? Fill that out. I want to see your take on what you noticed about our strong character here in our story. I hope you enjoyed it. I can't wait to see what you put in your Google document on King Midas today. All right, friends, until next time.